Hi everyone, and welcome to Hauntora. If you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button. This is the place where we explore the darkest, most deeply unsettling, true horror stories the internet has to offer. And if you've been here before, welcome back. Genuinely glad you're here. I want to keep the preamble short tonight, partly because I don't have much to say that wouldn't feel like stalling, and partly because these stories deserve to breathe. Some nights, I sit down and the intro writes itself. Tonight it didn't. That alone probably tells you something, but first, thank you. Not as a formality, not as a habit. Genuinely. The people who stick around, who send messages after midnight saying something hit them harder than they expected, who come back week after week without needing to be asked. I think about that more than you'd probably guess. It's the reason this still feels like something worth doing carefully. All the links are at the top of the description. They'll always be there. Easy to find. 2 stories tonight. I found the first one through a thread I wasn't supposed to be reading at that hour, and I mean that. The second one came from somewhere quieter, and I think that made it worse. I've been carrying it around for weeks now, and I still can't fully explain why. Sometimes a story doesn't disturb you loudly. It just settles in somewhere it shouldn't and stays. Comments are open when it's done. Come tell me what you thought. I read every single one. Now your lights down, get somewhere you feel safe, and let's begin. Viewer discretion is advised. I've been in caves before, real ones. Not the kind with gift shops and guided tours and little rope barriers telling you where to step. I mean technical caves, where you clip your primary light to your chest harness and you keep 2 backups on your belt and you move through the dark like it's a second skin. I've been doing this for 11 years. I've crawled through passages so tight I had to exhale just to fit. I've mapped systems that had never been touched by another human being. I say this because I want you to understand exactly the kind of person I am before I tell you what happened in North Carolina. I'm not the type to panic. I'm not the type to see things. There were 4 of us on that trip. Marcus had organized it. He'd been tracking a lead on an unmapped karst system in the western part of the state, deep in a stretch of national forest that doesn't see much foot traffic. The topography suggested something significant. Old limestone, the right kind of drainage patterns. He'd been working the permits for months. Sarah and Devin rounded out the team. Sarah was our geologist. Devin was the most technically experienced caver I'd ever worked with. Calm, methodical, the kind of guy who checked his gear 3 times before he checked it a 4th. We weren't amateurs, I want that to be clear. We based out of a rental cabin about 4 miles from the entrance. 2 nights, maybe 3 if the system warranted it. The drive up was easy. The cabin was clean enough. We spread the topo maps across the kitchen table that first evening and went over the plan. The entrance was a vertical drop, about 22 feet. Opening into what the surface survey suggested was a significant horizontal passage running roughly northeast. Standard stuff. We ate, we slept, we went in the next morning. The first hour was exactly what I expected. The drop was clean. The passage opened up nicely, maybe 6 feet of ceiling at the highest point, tighter in some spots, but nothing technical. The air was cold and wet and smelled like deep earth, that mineral smell you get in old limestone systems. Devin was on point. I was second. Sarah behind me, Marcus anchoring. We were talking normally, making notes, doing what we came to do. Then Devin stopped. Not a hand signal, he just stopped walking. Stood there in the middle of the passage with his helmet light aimed at the wall to his left. I came up beside him and looked at what he was looking at. It was a groove in the rock, a single horizontal groove cut into the limestone at about chest height, maybe 8 inches long, smooth, too smooth. I remember running my thumb along it and thinking it felt almost polished. I told myself it was water erosion. Limestone does strange things. Solutional features can look almost deliberate. Devin nodded when I said it out loud. We kept moving. 20 minutes later, there was another one. Same height on the wall, same length, same side. I didn't say anything that time. The passage started trending downward around the 2-hour mark. The ceiling dropped, and we went to hands and knees for a stretch before it opened back up into something remarkable. A chamber, maybe 40 feet across, with a ceiling we couldn't fully reach with our lights. The floor was flat. There was a small pool in the far corner fed by a seep in the wall. It was genuinely beautiful. The kind of thing that makes you remember why you do this. Marcus was photographing the pool. Sarah was sampling the sediment near the far wall. Devin and I were checking the passages leading out of the chamber. There were 3. Standard procedure, just a quick look to gauge priority. The second passage Devin looked into, he stepped back from almost immediately. Not fast. Just, he stepped back and then he stood very still. I asked him what he was looking at. He said, "I'm not sure." I looked. The passage was narrow, maybe 18 inches wide at the shoulders. Standard crawlway. But the floor of it was wrong. The mud had been disturbed in a pattern I couldn't reconcile with water movement or animal activity. Not footprints. Not exactly. More like something had been dragged through repeatedly. The same path over and over until the mud on either side had been pushed into low ridges. I crouched and looked closer with my headlamp on full. On the left wall of the crawlway, about 3 feet in, there was another groove. Then another. Then another. Evenly spaced. 6 of them in a row. I backed out. I told Marcus and Sarah what we'd seen. We decided to mark it and move on. We'd flag the crawlway on the map. Come back to it last. Rational decision. Completely rational. The system was larger than expected, and we had limited time. We took the third passage out of the chamber instead. I don't know exactly when I started noticing the sound. It wasn't a sound you could point to. That's the thing that made it so difficult to process. It was more like the absence of sound shifted. In caves, you get used to dripping water, the tiny movements of air, the creak of your own gear. This was underneath all of that. A low, intermittent vibration, not mechanical, almost like pressure against the ears more than actual noise. I checked my equipment. I asked the others if they felt it. Sarah said she thought it might be a water feature somewhere deeper in the system. That made sense. I filed it away. Devin went quiet around hour 4. That was the first thing that genuinely registered as wrong, not explainable. Devin talked constantly underground. Not chatter, just a running commentary of observations, measurements, thoughts. It was one of the things that made him good at what he did. So when he stopped talking, I noticed. I asked him if he was all right. He said he was fine. He said it without turning around. We were making our way back toward the main chamber when he stopped again. This time he sat down, just sat down on the floor of the passage, cross-legged, put his hands on his knees. I came up beside him and put my light on his face. His eyes were open. He wasn't unconscious. He looked at me and said very clearly, something touched my back. I asked him when. He said, just now. I looked at the passage behind us, empty. I looked at the walls on either side. Nothing. I asked him if he was sure, and he said yes, absolutely. Something had pressed against the lower part of his back. Open palm. Deliberate. We got him out. We didn't finish the survey. Marcus and I supported Devin on the ascent, and Sarah went first to rig the rope. Devin walked out under his own power and told us twice more that he was fine. He wasn't acting erratic. He wasn't confused. He was just very quiet. Back at the cabin, we checked him over. He lifted his shirt and turned around, and I looked at his lower back, and I didn't say anything for a moment. There were marks. 4 of them, parallel, spaced unevenly, not like fingers, not quite. The skin wasn't broken, but the tissue underneath was raised and already bruising. Sarah photographed them. Marcus called the nearest ranger station. We drove Devin to an urgent care facility 40 minutes away that evening. The doctor who examined him used the word contusions. She asked him how he'd sustained them. He said he didn't know. She looked at the photographs. She asked again. He said the same thing. She referred us to a facility in Asheville for a follow-up because she wanted imaging done. The imaging showed nothing internal. The bruising resolved over about 10 days. The ranger sent 2 people to look at the cave entrance. They didn't go in. They took our maps and our notes and told us they'd follow up. We never heard back. Marcus submitted a formal incident report to the Caving Society. There was no investigation. Devin has been on 2 trips since then. He doesn't talk about what he felt in that passage. I've asked him once. He said he knows what a hand feels like, and he knows what it doesn't feel like, and he doesn't have anything else to add to that. The grooves in the wall stay with me more than anything else. Not because they were the most frightening part, because they were the first part. They were there before we were. Same height, same side every time. Like something had been marking its way through that system in the dark, long before 4 people with headlamps and rope and every rational explanation in the world came down to find it, long before, and apparently not alone. I'm not the kind of person who scares easily. That's not bravado, and it's just accurate. I studied geology in college. I've camped alone in 3 different mountain ranges. I've had a drill slip and go through my palm in a workshop, and my first instinct was to look at the damage and figure out how to stop the bleeding, not scream. Fear to me has always been something you acknowledge and then move past. A signal, not a destination. I say all of that because I need you to understand what it means when I tell you that what happened in that cave, I haven't moved past it. 12 years later. Still haven't. We were 14. Caleb and I, the summer before high school. That window of time where you're just old enough to go places without parents, but not old enough to understand why parents existed in the first place. The cave was a local thing, one of those spots that every kid in a 30-mile radius knew about, but nobody talked about around adults. You just hear it from an older kid at some point. You know about the cave, out past the grain elevator, past the second fence line, and then the coordinates lived in your head till you finally went. Caleb was the one who pushed for it. He was always the pusher. Compact kid, nervous energy, always moving his hands when he talked. He'd heard from his older brother that the cave went back maybe 60 feet, then opened into a small chamber the size of a bedroom. Not dangerous, not deep, just dark. We packed 2 flashlights. Mine was the big yellow mag light my dad used for power outages, a bag of chips, and 2 water bottles. We told our parents we were biking to the reservoir. The walkout was August hot and flat. Corn on both sides of the gravel road, dried out and clicking in the breeze. The kind of day where everything feels permanent and still. Caleb kept talking about some video game the whole way out. I remember thinking how normal everything felt. How completely, unremarkably normal. The entrance was smaller than I expected, maybe 4 feet high, tucked into a limestone shelf that jutted out of a low rise in the ground. The only topographical variation for what felt like miles. You had to duck to get in. The drop in temperature was immediate. Probably 15 degrees cooler inside. That part I expected. Limestone caves hold cold. I knew that. What I didn't expect was the smell. It wasn't rot. It wasn't animal. It was something older than both of those things. A wet mineral smell, almost metallic, like the inside of a well that hasn't been used in decades. Caleb made a face. I told him it was just groundwater, which it probably was. I filed it away and moved forward. The first 30 feet or so were unremarkable. The passage narrowed, then widened, then narrowed again. The walls were damp. Our flashlight beams caught the texture of the rock, pocked and ridged, almost organic looking up close. I was paying attention to the geology of it. That's the kind of thing I did. I remember running my hand along the wall and thinking about sediment compression, about how long it takes for limestone to form. Millions of years of pressure, just to make this little tunnel. Caleb was quieter once we got inside. His flashlight kept moving fast, corner to corner, like he was checking rooms. I noticed, but didn't say anything. Then his light hit the back of the chamber. It was exactly like his brother described. A widening at the end, maybe 12 feet across, ceiling rising to about 7 or 8 feet at the peak. There was a natural shelf of rock along one side, almost like a bench. It was fine. It was just a cave. We stood there for a second, eating chips, our voices bouncing off the walls in that slightly strange way sounds behave in enclosed rock spaces. Caleb said something like, "I thought it was going to be scarier." I said, "It's a hole in the ground, man." We'd been in there maybe 20 minutes when I heard the first thing. I almost didn't register it. That's what makes it hard to explain to people. It wasn't loud. It was low. A low, sustained, I want to say tone, not a voice. Not yet. More like if you pressed your ear to a wall and someone on the other side was humming to themselves without knowing anyone could hear. I actually stopped mid-sentence. I was saying something about the rock formation on the ceiling and just tilted my head. Caleb caught it immediately. "What?" I told him to be quiet for a second. We stood there in the dark, breathing through our noses. My mag light was pointed at the ground. I could hear the sound again. Faint, rhythmic, not wind. I know what wind sounds like moving through a rock formation. I've heard it plenty. Wind has a randomness to it, a variation in pitch. This was consistent, too consistent, like something producing it intentionally. My brain ran through the list. Water moving somewhere in the rock, an animal in an unseen passage above us, sound traveling from the road, somehow distorted by the acoustics. I kept returning to that last one. We weren't far from the road. Sound does strange things in enclosed spaces. I'd read about cave acoustics, doing exactly this kind of thing, taking noise from a distance and transmitting it in strange, unrecognizable forms. I told Caleb it was probably a truck passing on the highway. He looked at me in the half-dark and said nothing. The second time, it wasn't a tone. It was closer to a voice, still low, still indistinct. But there was cadence in it now, the way syllables stack in speech, that particular rise and fall that doesn't happen in natural sound. I felt the hair on my forearms stand up. My body decided before my brain did. I was standing in a closed rock chamber with no exit behind me, in the dark, and something, somewhere in that darkness, was producing a sound shaped like language. Caleb grabbed my arm. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say, because then it came a third time, and the third time it was coming from directly behind us, between us and the entrance. We'd been in that cave for maybe 25 minutes. We knew the layout. 30 feet of narrow passage, one chamber, one way in and one way out. There was nothing behind us. We'd just come from there. The passage was empty. I knew it was empty. The sound came from inside it anyway, not the road, not wind, not water, structured and deliberate and close. Maybe 10 feet back in the passage we needed to walk through to leave. I could not identify what it was saying. I could not tell you if it was a word or a name or something, without any linguistic equivalent at all. What I can tell you is this. The sound was not made by anything I've encountered before or since, and I've spent a lot of years since that summer trying to find a match. We ran. I hit my shoulder on the passage wall in the dark, hard enough to bruise it purple. Caleb was ahead of me, or I was ahead of him. I genuinely can't remember the order. I remember the way the light bounced off the rock in jagged strobes as we moved. I remember almost losing my footing on the wet ground. I remember the hot, violent relief of sunlight when we came through the entrance. The corn, the flat horizon, the completely ordinary August sky. We didn't talk about it on the way home. Not because we were in shock exactly. More because we understood instinctively that talking about it would require us to agree on what it was. And we weren't ready to do that, Caleb told his brother. His brother went back out there with 2 of his friends and a better flashlight. They said they heard nothing. They found nothing. They went all the way to the back chamber and waited for 10 minutes. Silence. They thought we'd made it up. I've never accused Caleb of making it up. He's never accused me. That's the thing about shared experience. You can't gaslight someone who is standing right next to you. The county did a survey of that area 3 years later as part of some agricultural zoning project. They noted the cave. They measured it. They found no secondary passages, no animal nesting, no evidence of human activity inside. The geological report listed it as a, quote, structurally unremarkable limestone formation of limited depth. Nothing in there. Nowhere for anything to be. I've built a pretty good life. I have a job I like. I sleep fine mostly. But every once in a while, at night in a quiet room, I'll hear something at the lower edge of my hearing. And before I can stop it, before the rational part of my brain can intervene, my body does the same thing it did when I was 14 years old, standing in the dark at the back of that cave. It just gets very still, and it listens.